A horrific event in the lives of two young boys leads one boy to feel immense amounts of guilt years later. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that's on my 2025 TBR, and also a banned book, and I'll talk about why it's been banned later. But it's a book about immigration and Afghanistan. I am referring to The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, which was written in 2003. For those who don't know, Khaled Hosseini is an Afghani writer. He's part of. He has like several different Afghani tribes in his heritage, Afghani ethnic groups in his heritage. He's been writing since about the early 2000s and getting published. This is his first book that was published, and what a debut it is! I will definitely recommend this later, but I am impressed that this was like somebody's first book. It is pure. It is very close to being perfect. There are a number of problems, as with any book, but I mostly very much enjoyed it. And Khaled frequently writes about the Afghanis, the events that in circumstances that affect their lives, and writing about various ethnic groups within Afghanistan. Some people have protested his work by saying he oversimplifies complex interactions between the different ethnic groups in Afghanistan, whereas he suggests that he's speaking truths that people don't necessarily like to hear. It's probably somewhere in the middle there. This is a pretty high quality book that I've read, and I'm very happy to have found Khaled's work. I'm definitely going to be seeking out more of his work in the future. I note this was on my 2025 TBR. Very happy to have made it through it. I should also note that I'm going to spoil this book. I intend, if you, I'm going to recommend it, so if you want to go read it, I recommend you do that now and then come back to the video afterwards. But I'll talk about what happens, and then I'll talk a little bit more about that in the analysis section. So without further ado, let's talk about The Kite Runner. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So, The Kite Runner focuses on Amir. He is a young Afghani boy from a wealthy family living in Kabul, Afghanistan. He comes from a wealthy family, although he has trouble connecting with his father. His father doesn't believe he has that mean streak in him, or he won't stand up for what's right or something like that. And Amir is constantly trying to connect with his father and prove that he's worthy of his love and respect. Which seems to be a persistent thing throughout most of his life. The family has a servant named Ali, who was a family friend of Baba, who the father, and that servant has a son named Hassan, and he's friends with Amir. They like each other, they hang out, but not in public because there's issues of class, because Amir comes from a wealthy family and Hassan is poor, and there's issues of ethnicity as well, because Hassan is part of a oppressed ethnic group at the time, and Amir is kind of embarrassed to be hanging around with him, and they seem to be bullied by a particularly heinous person named Seth, who supports Hitler for some reason. He's half German, and just tries to beat them up at every chance he gets. Eventually, in the 1970s and 80s, where the story takes place, a coup happens, which turns Afghanistan into a republic, and things get a little bit stressful. There's a kite running tournament, where people battle kites to determine who's the winner. Amir enters it in the hopes that he can impress his father, and he also hopes to catch the final kite in what's known as kite running, which is the title of this story. He manages to win, and then Hassan goes and chases after the kite for Amir. It takes a while for Hassan to come back, so Amir goes and looks for him and discovers that he's been cornered by Asef and his friends. Asef demands the kite, which Hassan refuses, and he's threatening to beat him up and it reaches a point where Asaf rapes Hassan, and Amir does not step in to do anything about this. And this whole situation results in massive guilt, and neither Hassan or Amir talk about what happened. Amir feels a lot of guilt about this, as I just said. He tries to push Hassan to be sturdier and stand up for himself, which he doesn't want to do, and that makes Amir feel worse. And he even tries to get his father to fire Ali, which his father refuses to do. He even tries to have Hassan appear to have stolen money, like he sneaks some money into his living quarters. But his father ends up forgiving Hassan, and at that point Hassan and Ali kind of guess at what's happening and decide to leave on their own. And shortly after this, the Russians invade. The family has to flee to Pakistan, and then they flee to America, where they have to kind of start all over. But luckily they do have an Afghani support group living in San Francisco at the time. Eventually, Amir goes to college, still struggling to really connect with his father. He majors in English literature and becomes a writer, and he falls for a girl named Soraya. Baba gets cancer, but manages to see the wedding take place between Soraya and Amir before he dies of cancer. Amir gets published and starts to make a living as a writer. And him and Soraya are trying to get pregnant, which they're not able to. It takes more than 10 years for that to happen. And Amir believes that he's being punished for what had happened with Hassan, because the guilt is still following him. A short while later, he receives a phone call from Rahim, who was Baba's friend in Afghanistan. Rahim says there's still a chance to be good, a chance of redemption, which suggests that Rahim knew about what happened to Hassan and how Amir didn't tell anyone or step in. Rahim is sick, so Amir visits him in Pakistan, and there Rahim reveals what happened with Hassan's life. Essentially, how he moved to Pakistan with his father, fell in love with a woman and married her, and then moved back to Afghanistan with Rahim to live in Baba's old house. When Rahim went to Pakistan because he was ill, Hassan stayed behind, and the Taliban, who had moved in at that point, were doing threats on people like Hassan and his ethnic minority group. And they thought he was trying to steal the house from actual Afghanis. And so they killed him. He tried to fight back, but they killed him, and they killed his wife, and they took his child and sent them to an orphanage. Nobody really knows what happened to that child. And at that point, Amir reveals that Hassan is actually Rahim reveals that Hassan is Amir's half-brother, that Baba had an affair with Ali's wife, which was a great shame to him, and never told anyone that Hassan was related to Amir. Amir is frustrated and angry that this information was withheld from him, and he feels even worse about what happened to Hassan. He doesn't want to go to Kabul and pick up the child, his nephew, because he doesn't want to get involved in that torrid affair or anything like that. But he decides that this is the only way to really get redemption for what happened all those years ago. Amir travels to Kabul to get Hassan's child named Sohrab. They check the orphanage and find out that the Taliban had taken the child, and they go to make a deal with the leader. The leader reveals himself to be Asaf, who is taking sick pleasure in killing others and forcing people to adhere to this religious fundamentalism. And he basically says that he's not going to give Amir the child unless they fight. They engage in a fight, which Asaf kicks Amir's ass pretty heavily, but Sohrab uses a slingshot that they got from their father to blind Asaf in one eye, and they manage to escape at that point. And Amir realizes that he wants to adopt Sohrab at this point, but he learns that it's very difficult because of adoption laws and the strict, weird standards in America. And when Sohrab hears that they might have to stay in an orphanage to facilitate the entire process, they decide they don't want to go back, and they're worried about being kidnapped again, and they try to kill themselves in the bathroom. After spending some time in the hospital, they get out. They're kind of solemn at that point, and Sohrab realizes the only thing they can do is to return to America and hope to get a visa or claim asylum at that point. And they return to America. They answer questions from his wife's family, Amir's family and whatnot. And he stands up for not only Sohrab, but for people of the same sort of minority group in Afghanistan. But Sohrab is still solemn and sad and going through a lot of trauma. However, there is a kite flying tournament that takes place a little bit later as Afghanistan begins to recover from the Taliban in the wake of 9/11. Sohrab and Amir begin bonding over the kite, and there's even a smile, which makes Amir happy to see Sohrab finally sort of recovering at that point, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is quite a bit worth talking about with The Kite Runner. It's a very fascinating and well written book, but the main theme that Hosseini is writing about here is that of guilt. It seems to be the through line for the entire story. Hosseini frames the story around Amir's shame of not protecting Hassan. Hassan was raped by a very angry young man, and the result was Amir didn't step in, and Hassan was forever changed as a result. And what's interesting is that Amir's shame, his guilt, pertains not only to the act itself of not stepping in, but the kind of excuses that he threw out in the wake that, he didn't need to do it because it wasn't his responsibility, even though he kind of knew it was, or that Hassan should have stood up for himself because he was weak, only for Amir to realize that Hassan's kind of passiveness is a benefit for him because he's a very gentle, loving person. And again, Amir is wrong to sort of place the blame on him. So the guilt pertains to him realizing that all of these are just excuses, and there's no reason he should have not stepped in. And what's worse is he's unable to really escape this guilt. It kind of follows him, and whenever Hassan's around, it makes him feel worse. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "But even when he wasn't around, he was. He was there in the hand-washed and ironed clothes on the cane seat chair, and the warm slippers left outside my door, in the wood already burning in the stove when I came down for breakfast. Everywhere I turned, I saw signs of his loyalty, his goddamn unwavering loyalty." And there you sense the frustration that was growing with Amir, the sadness that's growing with Amir, that he can't really escape what happened to Hassan, and that he knows deep down that it's his responsibility. And when his family moves to America, he sees some benefit in that maybe he'll finally be able to escape the signs of Hassan, and be able to begin anew. Stop focusing on all these things that have plagued him, and the what ifs and the what he should have done. He'll be able to finally escape that. But the feelings persist, partially because his father kind of reminds him about Hassan, for reasons that become clearer later in the story, but also because he's still around other Afghanis, and he's still reminded of honor, and he still hasn't earned his father's love in the way that he wants. So he's kind of realizing, I didn't stand up. I haven't become that person that my father wanted to be, and that might be related to Hassan. So it's hard to really escape the guilt in that way. But there's also a sense of being punished too. Him and his wife are trying to get pregnant, and it's not able to happen, and he feels like, this is God, Allah, punishing me for what I did wrong. And that's not really the case. God probably isn't punishing him, but he's connecting the two events, that he did something awful, and he doesn't see his wife as responsible because she's atoned for things she's done wrong in the past in a way that that Amir hasn't really done. He realized, she's a pure person. This is probably more on me than it is on her. What's interesting also is at the end of the story, it does seem like rescuing Sohrab helps Amir atone for all of this. There is a way to be good again, as Rahim says, his family's friend, which is an amazing line. It's repeated twice throughout the story, maybe more. But there is a way to be good again. There is a way for you to get over your guilt, and that is helping this child who is lost, who is vaguely related to you. But even though it does kind of help ease those feelings of guilt, it doesn't erase it. It doesn't provide an excuse. Like, at the end of the story, Amir knows that he should not have let what happened to Hassan happen to Hassan. But he can't live with that guilt forever. He can't let it tear it down and eat away at him on the inside. He has to live for the future and try to be a better person and live up to the standard that his father wanted him to be. So that's, which I'll talk more about in a few moments, but it's really interesting how Hosseini talks about guilt here, how it can follow you around. It's a very human feeling here. Like you did something bad and you're unable to escape your feelings and you want a way to atone, but you can't really find that. Eventually you're able to find a way to do that, but it doesn't erase things. Like it doesn't make what you did okay. You always just sort of have to face those feelings and try to let the sting lessen. Another interesting aspect of the story is the relationship between Amir and his father Baba. So Amir is constantly seeking his father's approval. It's something that he wants very deeply. He can't seek his mother's approval because she's dead, but he can try to seek his father's approval. He does this in a number of ways, as we see throughout the story, including the kite running tournament. But it seems like Baba is unhappy with Amir. Specifically, he notes Amir's passive nature, how he doesn't seem to have a mean streak. He doesn't stand up for anything. He doesn't fit the traditional standard of masculinity that Baba wants him to be, and so it's really hard for him to connect with his child in that way. And Amir hopes that he can kind of live up to that by committing various actions in the story, including the kite running tournament. The kite running is all about Baba in the story. He thinks that if he gets the kite, or if he wins the kite running tournament and then he works with Hassan to catch the kite that fell, the last kite, like he can prove himself to his father and prove that he's worthy of attention. And that's why we see in the story when Amir chooses the kite over Hassan, because if Asef just beats up Hassan and rapes him, he's not going to steal the kite. He's just going to take Hassan's dignity in that way. But when Amir chooses to let that happen, he's choosing Baba over Hassan, but he's doing it in the worst way possible because his father absolutely wouldn't have liked that. We never find out in the story. I have a feeling if Baba did find out, he would be very angry and frustrated, not only because Hassan is his actual son, but also because Amir just let an injustice happen. It was essentially a crime to let someone's dignity be stolen, which is something that Baba talks about frequently in this story. But even after getting that kite, he's still hungry for his father's approval. Amir realizes that Baba seeks greater things from him, and he's not really proving himself in that manner, but he doesn't realize that until later in life. Baba seeks for Amir to be a stand-up guy on his own, stand up for what's right, stand up for others, not just be passive and let society walk all over you. And letting Asef do that to Hassan, he's not really standing up and gaining his father's approval in that way. And Rahim even points that out later in the story. He said, when Amir says, "I don't want to go to the place in Kabul. I don't want to go there to pick up that nephew. It's not my business anymore." Rahim says, "Well, maybe you aren't the man that your father hoped you would be." Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "You know," Rahim Khan said, "one time when you weren't around, your father and I were talking, and you know how he always worried about you in those days. I remember he said to me, 'Rahim, a boy who won't stand up for himself becomes a man who can't stand up to anything.' I wonder, is that what you've become?" Which is a fascinating passage there, but it gets at another central conflict of the story, is whether Amir will be good enough to earn his father's approval in that way, to be that stand-up guy. And it really seems at that point, no. The reason he hadn't earned his father's approval is because he didn't have that great of character. That was what he was missing, which is probably a hard realization to have. Not only did you not have your father's approval, but the reason you didn't have it was because you were kind of a bad person in some way, or you lacked some essential aspect of your character to make you care about other people enough. Maybe that had something to do with growing up in a place like Afghanistan at a time of political turmoil, but that doesn't excuse your behavior of letting bad things happen to other people. And so what essentially Hosseini is pointing out is that we must be happy with ourselves to become worthy. We must become stand-up people. We must fight for the rights of others and be comfortable in that and be happy with ourselves, because as evidenced by the guilt, like Amir isn't happy with himself. He isn't comfortable in who he is and doesn't believe himself to be a stand-up guy. So of course he's not going to be worthy in Baba's eyes. There's those feelings of guilt which Baba can kind of sense, but there's also the actions as well. So it's an interesting dynamic between Amir and Baba, which unfortunately Amir never sort of gets to resolve those unfortunate relationship issues. But after Baba dies, he does sort of become the man that Baba was hoping he was, which is equally good, I think. Hosseini is also writing about ethnic tension between the ethnic minorities, the ethnic groups, and in Afghanistan. You see, in the story, Asef's hatred of Hassan because of his ethnic group that he's a part of, and it starts out as just like teasing and bullying, but it quickly grows to much larger things, especially once he's older, because you see the horrifying behavior of stoning people to death, joining the Taliban, practicing religious extremism, and harming people who don't abide by your way of thinking. And he sort of reviles, or he loves the feeling of doing this to others. So you really have to address this behavior at a young age, otherwise ethnic violence is going to be seen as normal and just a thing you can do. But there's also a sense of societal acceptance, because nobody really stands up for Hassan's people when they are being targeted in society. And that later leads to an ethnic cleansing, like straight up a genocide of these people at the time. And I think it's because of that societal acceptance how nobody really stands up, especially Amir, where he has a chance to stand up when he sees the stoning take place in the soccer stadium near the end of the story. Everyone in that stadium has a chance to stand up because there's more of them than there were of the Taliban. But people kind of allow it to happen because they think that they won't be put through the thresher machine eventually. But as the saying goes, I didn't stand up for them, and then they came for me, and nobody stood up for me because nobody was left. But you shouldn't stand up for people just because you're hoping someone else will stand up for you. You should do it because it's a right thing. But the essential thing that Hosseini is touching upon here is ethnic tension and how it can be seen as normalized. This ethnic violence can be normalized because people don't do anything when the initial signs show up, which is something that we've seen time and time again in America. There are other great things about this story, including the beautiful and profound writing, very touching in the way that Hosseini writes about Amir, the way that he writes about Hassan, the way that he writes about the tension in Afghanistan. It's you really want root for these characters in these places to be in a better position. He also writes about trauma pretty well, particularly Sohrab's trauma of not wanting to stay in Afghanistan and the actions that he takes to avoid being trapped in this system. And once he makes it to America, the difficulty of connecting with others and being shy. It's very interesting how Hosseini is writing about trauma there. And then the loss of identity that you see in the story with people leaving Afghanistan and it becoming a different place. You can't return to a place that is no longer what it was, even after the Taliban are sort of kicked out. It's still not the Afghanistan you remember. It's far, far removed, and it's a war-torn place that might not recover for generations. So it's very interesting how Hosseini is writing about that, especially given I think the Taliban have made a return in Afghanistan years later. So the struggle persists, and it's the fault of those in power in Afghanistan, the fault of the Russians who invaded, the fault of Americans as well. And he doesn't directly say, that the Americans are at fault, which I think is a part of the problem. Like, he just points a finger at the Russians, but it's actually America that, sort of financed a lot of these problems in Afghanistan. I get that that's not the focus of the story, but it's weird that he would kind of gloss over that, which I think is partially why this story was so accepted in America, because it's not pointing fingers and saying, you guys are partially responsible here. I do also want to talk about Asef in this story, specifically how he might be undermining the end of this story, because the way the story is set up is focusing on Amir and his guilt over how he can let an action happen years later, and then he goes back to get Sohrab all those years later, and it's supposed to be a moment where he's supposed to confront how he's allowed things like this to happen, and he hasn't stood up for the people that he should stand up for. But at the point where that's supposed to be the realization, Asef shows up, and it becomes mostly about him and the Taliban and how they might be the true cause of many problems in Afghanistan, which they might be the cause of many problems in Afghanistan. But I do think Asef undermines the story in some way, because he shifts the focus from Amir and how, normal people or people of minor power can allow these heinous things to happen to people like Hassan through their inaction, and he shifts the focus to Asef, a sort of cartoon villain who supports Hitler, like very clearly the bad guy in this story. You go from like shades of gray to something just black and white, and again, like, you're kind of giving people like Amir cover to sort of excuse their actions, like, oh, what I did was bad, but it was no way as bad as what Asef does, and how he does actual violence. And Amir doesn't really stand up to Asef at all. He just gets his ass kicked, and then Sohrab kind of takes over. It is kind of weird how Hosseini shifts that focus in this story, because it takes away Amir's true redemption and acknowledging his actions. And I thought for a moment like Amir would run into Hassan all those years later and be forced to confront his behavior in that way. But that never really happens, and I think that's a missed opportunity in this story. It doesn't drag down the story. It just feels like a glaring problem, a way for Hosseini to offer cover to other people and not make them feel too bad that they allow violence to occur. Because you do have to point the finger at people like Amir, those with means, those with some amount of money, because they allow this thing to sort of happen. They can step in, they can say no, they can intervene. But again, like, Hosseini just shifts the focus to Asef and is like, oh, well, what you did was wrong, but it wasn't as wrong as what he was doing. When in reality, those things are maybe two sides of the same coin. It's just one is direct violence and one is indirect. The last thing I'll note is that this is a banned book, and it's always important to ask, why are they banning books such as this? And I do think it's interesting because at least one of the descriptions is that this promotes gender fluidity. It's part of the recent 2020 bans where these weird wacko conservatives were like, we got to ban any book that promotes like transgender ideology or whatnot. And I don't really get how that shows up here, because I don't recall there being any transgender characters. There is a sort of softness to the masculinity of both Hassan and Amir, which is positive, but I wouldn't say it directly negates any sense of masculinity. So I don't know why they opposed it for that reason, but it's a very dumb reason to oppose it, and we should say that out loud. I do also think that it might be banned because of, also because of the portrayal of ethnic minorities and oppression in Afghanistan, which is important to talk about in any culture and address the injustices that might take place there. But it might also be banned because it does sort of point a finger at America in some ways. It points a finger at those in power and says, these people were doing just fine before you showed up. They were autonomous and they were doing well, and you might call them savages or something like that, but they lived in a perfectly good society, one that treated people well, and they had the means to survive. And the introduction of these Russian and American proxy wars kind of threw things out of whack. And I get how people might try to ban the book for that reason, because it suggests that the wars in the Middle East made things worse than before. Even though people say they were doing a war on terror and whatnot, it only stood to benefit America and, these defense contractors. So it is always important to address why books are banned and to read those books that are banned, because if someone tries to ban something, as I always say, it usually means they're trying to prevent you from seeing something or hearing about certain ideas. Anyway, this has been quite a long video, but yeah, and I do think those are my thoughts on The Kite Runner, but I do think it was an amazing book, probably one of the best that I've read this year. I definitely recommend it to you out there. I managed to find this at my local library, but I probably would have bought it, and I probably might buy it afterwards just so I can have a copy. But yeah, don't forget to patronize your local libraries. They might have interesting books like this. But yeah, if you have any thoughts about it, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about this book or this author if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and kite running travels. Farewell.